boys used to call me Eddie. I wanted to be called a boy's name, and they embraced me as one of them. I was one of them, but I never looked like them. And it's kind of become a metaphor for me in terms of my experience, good and bad, in terms of the importance of diversity, underpinned by inclusivity, and that behavioral inclusivity that I think I'm going to talk about a little bit today. The comfort of being, I had this comfort being different from a young age because of those boys, and even though I knew I looked different, I was accepted. And so I want to talk about the difference between looking different and being accepted for who you are, which is the diversity piece and actually feeling included. They're two very separate things, but sometimes one of them gets lost. And you know, I began to seek out actually opportunities later on in life to be the one that stood out, because from such a young age I stood out and was accepted. And so whether it was, you know, going on Match of the, being the first woman on Match of the Day, whether it was making sure that I was one of the first athletes to be to get a sponsorship with Under Armour as a female athlete, I started to seek out opportunities where the door was actually closed and there was a ceiling there. But because I felt comfortable in that, I always saw them as doors that could open. But that's ultimately because I felt accepted in my difference. You can feel different and feel very excluded. And so, you know, whether it's, you know, 2008, back then when I went on Match of the Day as the first female footballer, fast forward to 2021, there's now several female footballers on TV. So I'd like to think that mentality towards opening doors has now normalized female football, normalized what people feel was different is now being included. So diversity wasn't much of an issue for me. My diversity wasn't much of an issue, but in environments, often the inclusivity is the issue. It's the boys made me feel like my difference wasn't a problem. But a lot of the time in corporate environments, there is a push for diversity. They've realized that diversity is important. On the surface, it's the picture, it's the image of the firm, it's the image of the company, it's the image of the brand. But behind all of that, behind the veil, it's really important to have a culture of inclusivity and understand what that looks like. It's knocking on the door. It's embracing other people that don't think, look, behave like you. It's sitting down and having dinner with people you've never spoken to before. You know, I used to play for Chelsea, and we had players from South Korea, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, America, you know, all over the world. And we used to practice inclusivity. We would make sure that we understand where each other came from. And it's really important to really stress that, because it is an intentional action. It's not something that just comes and follows after diversity. It's something that has to be practiced behaviorally in organizations. You can have an increase in diversity in terms of the picture, but if you don't have inclusivity, you almost have pockets of people that look different, but don't actually get along, don't actually foster that the importance of having that environment. So I really want to stress that there is no point having diversity without inclusivity. And it sounds obvious, but the inclusivity part has to be the behavioral part, the intentional behavior towards people that look different, people that come from different backgrounds, think differently, and sit around the table and, in essence, feel like a family, even though you don't look alike. So it's finding out the why. It's finding out why people do what they do. It's finding out what motivates people from being who they are. Asking those questions is really important to understand why you work with the people you work with. It's that inclusivity piece. It's the piece behind the person that you work with that's really important. So it's spending time with people that look different to you. It's fostering an inclusive culture. It's finding out the underlying motivations. And then you will have the diversity and inclusivity that I had when I was younger, that I looked different, but I was one of the boys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eni. And it's really fascinating to hear you talk And I was really intrigued by you talking about seeing those barriers. It's a bit like scoring a goal in a way. You think, I see it in front of me, I'm going to smash it. Do you have that sense? Do you think from within that you see something ahead of you, and if somebody's saying to you, yeah, you can't do that, it's going to be quite hard. Why do you think you have this urge to say, I can?
I think I've just always been somebody that sees it as an opportunity and not a risk. You know, yeah, you have to see closed doors as something that can be opened. And it's risky, but on the other side of that is something great. So being the odd one out, as I said, as a youngster, being somebody that, you know, challenged the sort of norm, I almost went to seek out those opportunities that open the door for others to walk through, because it does become easier when you do it as a first, and then it becomes easier after that. So it's sometimes it's scary, but I think I've been able to be a pioneer in that way, by thinking of it as an opportunity and not a closed door.
Does it frustrate you well, moving on to talk about inclusivity, does it frustrate you when, for example, corporations may put people of diverse backgrounds in an advert, but actually you scratch the surface and find out that actually the proportions of diversity within the workforce are very low indeed, and in fact they're just playing lip service?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is lip service, and it is that sort of it's the picture that you see behind the veil. It's not necessarily the culture that is being addressed. And I also think people just, you know, in terms of recruitment of people, often you just do the same things and you fish in the same ponds, and actually it's about broadening its perspectives. It's about broadening recruitment strategies. It's about saying, if different types of people are involved in the recruitment process, they will see different types of people capable. But it's really about being conscious about the diversity, but the culture behind that. When the person comes into work, how do they feel? Okay, I look different, I've ticked that box, but how do I feel about being here? You know, how do people get along, even though they look and talk different and they think differently? So it's something that, it doesn't frustrate me, but I think it's something that needs to be continuously worked on, because I think the diversity is the buzzword that everybody wants to achieve, but the cultural piece is much more difficult to establish. So if we focus on that piece as well, then the two come together, where you have, you know, a rainbow array of different people working together that can get along and mesh.
We talk a lot about role models. Who has been your role model? And have you had women giving you a leg up in football to help ease your path?
I have so many. I have so many. My earliest role models were the Williams sisters, so Serena Williams. My mother is a big role model for me. People like Michelle Obama. Just women that have really stood and really kind of been pioneers for their respective fields. That really inspires me. It really makes me think anything can be achieved.
If you're in an environment that you feel as though you're the only one, you're the first person really, or you're very underrepresented, how do you go about getting allies in a way to help you feel confident enough to really join in and give your all? Because you said you felt as though you were accepted. How do you get to that point?
Um, I think it's not necessarily always for me to sort of get to that. It's how other people make you feel. So it's reliant on other people to kind of accept your difference. But it's also important for you to be yourself, be authentic self, because that often allows people to say, well, actually, I can't bring you down because you're different. So it is a two-way process, but I think a lot of the time with allies, it's a self-understanding, it's a self-reflection about our biases, our blind spots, to accept other people that may not look or talk or behave like you. I think we all have a responsibility to understand how to embrace people that aren't like us.
We seem to have lost Susannah there for a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodbye to Eni. Eni, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to run.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring on the next speaker. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Anne Daniels.
Yeah, what a great presentation from Eni, and thank you for inviting me also to your showcase. There is my face. I am a polar explorer and motivational speaker, and that always catches me a little bit unawares because I had never imagined I would be a polar explorer. It was not part of my dreams and aspirations growing up. I also was brought up on a council estate in Bradford, so I didn't really know the outdoors. And life changed for me when I was actually in a difficult place. I had 18-month-old triplets, and I was in a broken marriage. I'd given my job up in the bank, and somebody told me about an advert asking for ordinary women to apply to be part of the first all-female team to walk to the North Pole. And there was every reason that I shouldn't apply for that. I had never skied, I'd never been outdoors. But I really think if we let the fear of our failure overwhelm us, then we really don't achieve anything. And so I was afraid, but I felt the pain and I just applied anyway. Thankfully for me, the selection was over 9 months. And whilst I was completely hopeless at the beginning, I had 9 months and I put a plan together and I worked hard and I trained and I learnt the skills, how to read a map and all the things that they were asking of me. I was either looking after baby triplets at 18 months or I was training. And by putting everything in that I possessed to those two things and nothing else, I managed to get on the first expedition. That expedition was a relay. It was to the Arctic, and it was 5 teams of 4 women who went in relay format to the North Pole. So I was on the first leg of the journey, which was a great honour. And then Bravo came in, Charlie Delta, and finally on the 27th of May 1997, there they were, the last team Echo at the North Pole. I was at home with my children at the time. I wasn't even on the ice, and everybody celebrated this great success. But you know, it was everybody's success. And that's the same in any team or wherever you work. If everybody puts everything in that they can, that's when the magic happens. It's not just the people at the top. Every person is important to the success of a mission. And I truly believe that. I fell in love with the Arctic and expedition life, and I really wanted to make that my new career. So even though I still had small children and I was a single mother, I got together with 4 other women from that expedition, and 5 of us, we put together an expedition and we skied 700 miles across the windiest, coldest terrain on Earth, Antarctica. And we left from the edge and arrived at the South Pole for the millennium. We became the first British women's team to ski to the South Pole. So it was an all-women's team. But I had the dream in me, the big dream, to put an expedition together to go from land to the North Pole. And I think if you don't believe in your vision, how can you expect anybody else to? And so I asked Pom Oliver and Caroline Hamilton if they would join me on this expedition. And in 2002, we left from Ellesmere Island in Canada to walk across a moving crust of ice to the North Pole. The temperatures I expected to be around -35, -40. For the first 27 days, temperatures were between -46 Celsius and -58. We had 3 storms, everything froze. It was such a difficult environment to be in that we were physically surviving rather than, I think, performing. But I'm also a believer that how you are and how you behave will affect the whole team. So again, I felt the pain of it, and there were times when I didn't think that we could keep going. But I just took a deep breath, thought of how me and my team would be, and I did it anyway. And how my team members behaved affected my psyche. So between us, we kept the faith and we simply just kept going. Our faces froze, our eyelashes froze. And as a team, we had to really take care of each other and look after each other. It wasn't about individuals. We had to check each other for frostbite. In a night, we got into the tent and we just had some small cookers that we boiled snow with, and it was freezing in there, absolutely freezing. We had some real major traumas. One night we put the tent up and the ice broke all around us. It takes 2 days for a plane to get to you. So it was up to us to get out of this area that was cracking around the tent. That ice cliff appeared while we slept. The noise and the fear was huge. And again, we just had to suppress it, each do our own jobs and get us out of there. And by each of us trusting each other and doing what we were supposed to do, we got out. As soon as we got out, the wind picked up. We were quite traumatized. And so we thought, let's put the tent up and have some breakfast. Within minutes, the wind was so much, all we could do was put the tent on the floor, put our sleeping bags under it and lie in there while the wind battered us for 3 days. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't cook it to get warm. We couldn't walk and get warm. We couldn't even hear each other speak. And we just had to believe it would end, because in really difficult times, you have to remember to control what you can and let go what you can't. We couldn't control the weather. We couldn't control the cold. All we could control was our minds. And so we lived through it. We controlled our minds. We shouted to each other occasionally, "Are you okay?" Caring. And in 3 days, the sun did come out. And so did we. And so we put our tent up. We took a day off and we rethought everything we had to do. We had frostbite. We couldn't have changed it in those conditions. Caroline had frostbitten fingers. They are when they are better. And Pom had terrible frostbitten toes. And she skied for 47 days on these toes just to keep the expedition alive. We knew she would have to leave the expedition, and we had a resupply on day 47. And when she left, we were down to 2, which was quite traumatic for us. The ice and the terrain changes as you get closer to the pole. We had more areas of open water. We had thin ice. And we had to do something that we were afraid of, because the ice is disappearing. And we were afraid of it, but we swam in the water in order to get there. We thought of everything we could do rather than all the obstacles that were against us. We put our sledges as bridges. We made our days longer and longer. And after 80 long, arduous days, we finally made the North Pole. We were the first women in the world to do that. And the papers always said, Anne Daniels and Caroline Hamilton, the first women in the world to walk to both poles. And that made me sad, because Pom was there in her spirit. If she hadn't have kept going, we would never have got there. So it was Pom Oliver, Anne Daniels and Caroline Hamilton that made it. And I kind of want to finish just quickly by talking about, what do you do when you've done world records and you've really enjoyed it? And well, I wanted to do something a little different. And so the Earth that we live on is a magnificent environment. It's a fantastic place to live. And I began to love the Arctic. So luckily for me, a guy called Penn Haddow, who's an amazing explorer and fantastic leader, asked me to physically find the route. He was the leader for his Arctic survey. A guy called Martin Hartley took all the photographs so we could share what we found with as many people as possible and hopefully get people to engage with this planet that we live on. Every night, Penn drilled through the ice. Every day, I found a route through the most difficult terrain. And every day, Martin took photographs. The year after, we went back with 3 of us to look at the warmth of the ocean and measure some more. Penn stepped out because we had so many scientists involved that a guy called Charlie Patton came in. The 3rd year, we went back again with a scientist and a filmmaker. And then finally, for the last 2 years, I've worked with NASA on the ice. I've worked with the European Space Agency. I've worked with scientists around the world. And I've worked, if we're talking about women, I've worked as a woman, a mother, in a world of men, and I have also been accepted. I have my own mission from NASA, Mission Borneo, so I feel like I've really made it. And I would say all these things have happened because I took an opportunity. I didn't let the fear of failure stop me. I have led many expeditions, and I understand that to get a team together, you look after your team. You work with a changing environment. And if you all do your best for each other and for yourself, that's, to me, when the magic happens. So thank you for listening to my short story. I'm really pleased to be with you. And I will pass back to Susannah now, who I know has rejoined us.
I have. Thank you so much. And what an inspiring story you have, and certainly some lockdown lessons for everybody. I'm sure that we can really learn those 3 days in the howling wind stuck in your tent. Really fascinating. And I look forward to getting some more questions from the audience and pushing them to you a little bit later. Thank you, Anne. Let me move on now to our next speaker, Helen Sharman. Helen became the first British astronaut when, in May 1991, she launched on a Russian Soyuz spacecraft and spent 8 days orbiting the Earth, living and working on the MIR Space Station. With the 30th anniversary of her spaceflight this year, we're really thrilled that Helen is joining us for our showcase event. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Susannah. And you know, it's always a delight to work with Speakers Corner. I'm really delighted to be here and to share this platform with, with Eni and with Anne. So yeah, really thank you for inviting me. I thought I'd like to talk around the theme of working together, because, well, partly because we're all in this pandemic situation when actually, working remotely seems to be more the theme of the day for many of us. And also actually, there are many aspects of that I learned from my space mission that I've translated into my personal as well as private life that you might find useful yourself. Now, of course, with any space mission, like any complex project, you're relying on lots of various elements being brought together to make it successful. And you wouldn't be surprised if I tell you that, rather like a polar expedition, I'm sure there are all these different teams, network of teams actually, that have to work in a collaborative way. What really surprised me when I started my training and started to understand a little bit about how these teams are working was that hugely non-competitive way that the collaboration happened, that actually everybody was very much looking towards a shared aim, that shared purpose. And it was a very simple one. That was the idea of getting a succession of crews into space and back to Earth safely. And over and above anything that any individual team or any individual person in any individual team did, it was that end shared purpose that was so important. And I think it was that helped them to collaborate so well, and a very sort of top-down approach. Now, of course, that had to be met by a bottom-up approach, which I'll come on to in a minute. But nonetheless, all of this sort of collaboration doesn't mean to say that space missions go without any hiccups. And I think it would be right to say that every space mission has its problems. Mine was absolutely no exception. And I'd like just to share a picture of my launch, which was where the first hiccup actually happened. This is a Soyuz booster rocket launching a Soyuz spacecraft into space. You can see just a few seconds into the launch, we've got those, the outside 4 little booster engines working with the central core. They work simultaneously and give us the maximum G. We have about 4 G during the launch. So we feel 4 times as heavy as we do normally on Earth. But of course, we've done many more G in centrifuges in the training, and the launch itself doesn't last for long, although it's very kind of a bumpy and lumpy system as a launch, sort of as one of the rocket's engines is jettisoned and the next one kicks in. So it's not a nice sort of smooth transition into increased G and acceleration. But nonetheless, it's kind of an exciting time for the astronauts because this is something that we've been working towards for so long. But it was in the first few seconds of my launch when the first problem really happened. And this was an oxygen valve. And now an oxygen valve got stuck open. Now, you might think, well, what's the problem with that? You've got plenty of oxygen, but actually oxygen is a real hazard. You need to have enough, obviously, to breathe, to survive. But if you have too much, then that's a risk of explosion. So had that valve remained stuck open, then we would have had to have released all of the oxygen from the capsule and returned to Earth on the very next orbit. And I would have spent 90 odd minutes in space. But the important thing then is that I would have been safe. I would have been safe and I would have been able to go on another rocket. A second launch would have happened to space. So this is what I mean about the end goal, that actually, although that one specific thing might have gone wrong, and quite significantly wrong, the actual end mission would still have been able to happen. But inside our spacecraft, up there on top of the rocket, in fact, if I show you with my cursor there, just below the spike on the very top, that's where our Soyuz spacecraft is. And this is what it's like inside. 3 seats altogether. You can see a kind of a black empty seat on the very right of the picture there where the flight engineer sits, because this photograph was taken during a training session. We can't really get a decent photograph of what it's like inside a Soyuz spacecraft in real life because it is so cramped. This picture was taken actually by somebody who's looking down from a little module above our heads. So you can see fairly cramped. Actually in this position, I'm in the middle seat here in this training session. That's where the commander's going to sit for the launch. My seat would have been that one on the left of the photograph there. But from the very beginning of our training, a very, very different way of working was impressed upon me, different from anything I'd really been familiar with before. And it was how open and honest we were expected to be, not just with each other, with like me and my crew, but actually with everybody, with all of the trainers, with all of the scientists, with everybody in any team we worked with. Everybody was expected to be completely open and honest. So we would share ideas and voice concerns. We would admit errors and celebrate our successes. And this is what I meant at the beginning when I talked about this bottom-up approach, meeting the top-down one of a shared goal and the collaboration. But this openness enables us to actually reduce the risk of individual elements of that mission failing. So although the collaboration helps to sort of bring everything together, the individual elements are made by these different teams. And if individuals in those teams are open and honest, we can fix problems before they usually become a real hazard. And as usually you require 2 problems to come together before they really create your a big issue, because in anything really serious, you've got a backup system like being able to come back to Earth, for instance, and have a second attempt at that launch. Then this does enable the overall success of a space program with successive crews of people launching into space. But this was our spacecraft, a tiny Soyuz spacecraft with the 3 of us inside it, having got into space by that huge rocket. Of course, now the engines are all jettisoned and it's just our tiny Soyuz spacecraft gradually catching up with the space station. And I was aiming for the MIR Space Station. very much like the International Space Station now, made up in this modular way. We made our final approach a couple of 100 kilometers away when we realized that we had another problem. We were getting disparate information from the computers. We were at the wrong angle to the Earth. Now, we knew that if we missed the space station by a mile, it really didn't matter. We had enough fuel to go round the Earth and have a second attempt at docking onto the station. But if we missed our docking port by just a few centimeters, we risked damaging the space station and our spacecraft, so that not only might we not survive, but actually the two astronauts already on board that space station who were looking forward to our arrival, they might not make it either. So now, of course, we had done this in the training before. We knew what to do and we knew how to go onto manual control of our spacecraft. But now this was where all of that openness and that communication really came to the fore. Yes, we went straight into, if you like, autopilot. We knew what roles we had to do and we got on with those. But it was because we could be completely open. And when one of us said, that's fine, I've got this, we trusted them. Absolutely implicitly trusted them. We trusted each other with our lives. And of course, I'm here to tell the story. We made that docking in one piece, and that absolute fantastic feeling when we were able to float inside onto the space station was just absolutely, one of the best feelings I think I have ever had. Those two people who I launched into space with, my commander and my flight engineer, they became my best friends and I still count them amongst the best friends I have ever had. Now, that openness and the honesty that got me to the space station is really just indicative of the way the whole space program works. It's enabled multiple launches over decades. If you think back to the Russians in particular, they're decades hugely influential internationally, of course. And it's also enabled on a very, very individual level, people like me to do something that I would never, ever have expected. I mean, just as Anne said, she never expected to be a polar explorer. I certainly never expected to be an astronaut. I also grew up in a very normal kind of environment. I felt always very ordinary. I wasn't anything special from anybody else. Every quality I felt in myself, I could see in at least one other person. So when I heard of this opportunity for a Briton to go to and train with the cosmonauts and to do experiments on a space station, I just assumed that they'd never choose me. They'd choose somebody who was from the military, who flew aircraft, who was made of the right stuff. But actually, I had no idea at that time how much teamwork was going to be so relevant to that selection, and actually how important it is in teamwork to be able to empathize with other people, and how much easier that is when you can recognize something of yourself in them. And I knew, though, if I didn't put myself forward for this opportunity, nobody else was going to do it. And, well, if people laughed at me for having the audacity to think that maybe I could actually go into space, well, you know what? I could deal with that. And so I decided to have a go. I was selected, and it was through that training that also taught me not just about space, of course, but very much how to work together. So I got not only to go into space and to, experience this wonderful feeling of feeling weightless. This is the most natural, relaxing feeling you can imagine. I forgot what it was like to sit down, to stand up. And of course, this is great because you can use the full space on board your spacecraft. So when you're in a completely new environment like this, instead of trying to replicate exactly what you had before, obviously some things you have to replicate, like the life support systems, but we didn't need to have a seat to sit down on after the launch, and being able to use those 3 dimensions meant that the roominess of the whole spacecraft felt much bigger, and we could just get on and, of course, not just have fun like this, but also, of course, use that feeling of weightlessness for the job that I'd gone up to do, which was doing experiments. And this is just a few of those experiments that I took with me. I took experiments, and also there was technology and infrastructure that was taken up before I launched into space. And we all know, you know, working from home, how much we do rely on certain bits of physical kit and our broadband and everything to get us into work. But it really is those communications back with mission control that enabled all of this to go on. Communications that were vital, not just to do my job, but vital for my well-being. Now, we had no internet. This was 1991 when I flew into space. There was no email back then either. I mean, nowadays on board International Space Station, they have a satellite phone if they want to, 24 hours a day. Plenty of email, plenty of video links. We had the radio, and the radio only when we were over Russia, when we had a direct line of contact with mission control. But mission control knew it was so important for these communications. Of course, we had regular communications and we needed it for our work, and they were frequent. So we knew exactly when they were going to happen. But at the end of each connection, mission control made sure that there was at least a few minutes of time where we could just chat, because it's that general relaxed chat. It's talking about the details of somebody's work, somebody's life, getting friends and family to come into mission control so that we can chat to them and make those connections. And it's that detail of life on Earth that kept us safe and sane in space. I think something we probably all recognize when we're missing our friends and family so much in this sort of period of lockdown, but so important, and it's something that I think really shouldn't be taken lightly. But you know, it's not all work and no play. This is one of the views outside my window. I'm showing you the way I took the photograph, which kind of makes it feel upside down, but of course, you know, you don't get this normal up and down anymore. This is over the Pacific Ocean when the sun is almost setting. So it's just glancing off the sea, and you can just see on the rim of the Earth there, that thin blue line of our atmosphere. And we would often, you know, spend time looking out of the window. This was important to us, but we all like to spot times, spot places that we recognise. And I've found this photograph, actually taken quite recently by Jessica Mayer from the International Space Station. I hope you recognise parts of this. So north is on the left of the photograph as we're looking out. So we're looking here, sort of running down the middle certainly is England. And of course at night you can recognise the lights. So I reckon that bright light there, we've got London, so the southeast England. And as we move up through Birmingham, Liverpool, and go across the water there to Dublin, yeah, and Belfast, and then over to Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. So beautiful, beautiful sights and things that that we all look forward to seeing. This is the current crew, carrying on with all of their experiments. And you know, you might think, well, you know, what's the big deal? There's sort of 7 people now up in space. I mean, that's quite a big crew actually. And we talk about remote working, but you know, compared to us, there's 7 of them. What would we give every day now to be able to talk face to face with 6 other people in our workforce? Oh, wouldn't that be bliss? But of course, they're living in a very confined environment, and they will be relying on all of their tolerance and flexibility to be able to get through their time up there. Of course, communicating very much with their friends and family wherever they can on Earth. But also, you know, it's a long time, and so they try and mark it by doing things that make the days a little bit less samey every time. So Christmas Day, for instance, was a big celebration, and here's Shannon Walker. She was one of the SpaceX astronauts, and look, if you look on the top of the Christmas tree, she's put a model of her Crew Dragon spacecraft up there instead of a star, which I think is rather nice. But it's all of these kind of the little things like marking time. It's the communication with our friends and family, and it's about enjoying those little moments as well. Moments. It's okay every now and again to have really bad days, and we all do that. But we can think forward, and astronauts are encouraged to think about the good times that will happen and to try and learn from those downtimes so that we can put that into the rest of our lives in the future, to make the future lives even better than they were before. So I hope I've sort of just given you some idea about the kind of things that come together to what my view is to make a successful space mission. I think very much like Anne was saying, it's about people working together and pulling together. But for me, the whole thing is about amazing experiences that can happen, however ordinary you might feel you are. Amazing experience and fantastic achievements that might even be ultimately long-term internationally significant when we push forward our boundaries, when we work together in this open and collaborative way. We really can enjoy the rich opportunities of our vast and beautiful universe. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Susannah.
Helen, that was really stunning to hear and see all about your experiences. Really fascinating, and thank you so much. And I think many lessons for us in lockdown, appreciating the little things, looking forward to the future. So thank you very much. And let me put one of the questions that have come through from the audience to you. First of all, Helen, what does the International Women's Day slogan, "Choose to Challenge," mean for you and your work life? Because what I picked up there was your ability to say yes. It's so easy to look at a new opportunity and be nervous and fearful, but you kept saying yes, didn't you? Would you say that's absolutely key?
Well, I think I very much had this imposter syndrome at the beginning, you know, very much they're bound not to choose me because it's just little old me, and I recognise all of the negative traits in me that I'm not seeing perhaps in other people, that they may be hiding perhaps. And so I think for me, it was very much that whole idea of initially that it was just such a fantastic thing to happen. I would love it so much. And what did I have to lose by not going for it? Yeah. So rather, what did I have to lose if I did go for it? And if I didn't go for it, well, life would just stay the same. And life was fine. But actually, yes, challenging and pushing forward, I had an option of something absolutely fantastic happening. And so I just decided to go for it. But I did have to cope with, you know, my colleagues at work just laughed at me. And that was in some respects a bit hurtful. I wonder if they would have laughed at me had I been a man, and perhaps they would, because it was just such an amazing thing to do. But yes, it's the challenge. And if you don't push yourself forward, the whole thing about boundaries and that what we're doing in space is pushing forward humankind's boundaries. And it's just a natural desire to explore. And I think that comes down from the human race right down to us as individuals.
Let me bring in Anne now. Anne, you're listening to all of this. Did you ever feel the same, that people looked at you and almost laughed at what you wanted to do? And how satisfying was it afterwards when you could come back and say, look what I achieved?
Do you know, I think imposter syndrome has got to be something that runs through just about nearly every female. We always doubt ourselves, and I've learned to stop doing that. No, I was really lucky in as much as, you know, I had 3 small children. I was looking after them, and people were sort of saying to me, wow, how are you coping on your own with 3 babies? So people were kind of concentrating on that. And I didn't really shout too much about going on this selection weekend, but because I didn't see anybody because I was looking after the babies. I didn't have a social life. But what I did have, which filled me with a lot of hope, was I lived in a military town, and I contacted them initially because I didn't have any of the kit I needed and I couldn't afford it. And I got it all, and it was all green. And I looked like a little army girl, even though I had no experience. I never asked where it came from, by the way. And then they helped to train me because I didn't know how to do that. So I had military friends who were teaching me how to do military exercises on my patios while the babies were asleep. They were teaching me how to read a map, even how to pack a rucksack, the basic things that you need. And they were always behind me. I found that the guys and women that don't need to prove themselves don't put you down, they help you. It's the ones that possibly have got their own insecurities and think that they can pull you down to make them look better. So I had a lot of people help me. Whether they thought I would go to the North Pole and whether they thought I was mad is a different thing. I didn't bother asking. I just took the help and ran with it. So no, I've been full of help from the military and other people, really. I've been very lucky.
It really reminds me when you're talking about this, one of the first training weekends that I went on when I joined the Royal Air Force Reserves, and I really didn't know anything about the military, yet there was plenty of helping hands. And as you say, people who really want you to do well. And it's those people, those generous with their time. I think it's really important that you seek them out when you're approaching a new challenge and recognize who exactly will be those cheerleaders for you going forward. And interestingly, throughout my career in the Air Force, those people were there right to the bitter end and are now, you know, as Helen mentioned, some of the people that you work with when you went up into space are still your really good friends, because you do create lifelong friends, don't you? And Helen, I just want to put to you another question that's come through. What would be the most important message you want to send to young women thinking about following in your footsteps?
Oh, wow. Well, I think the first thing is that these opportunities, while they might be few and far between, that doesn't mean to say that it can't be you. If nobody else has done it, you can be the first. You can be the first from your family, the first from your school. You can be the first. So just go for it. If you don't then get what you're absolutely trying for, well, actually, you know, you'll find so many other opportunities also become available on the way, because you are challenging yourself and developing in the process. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that, yeah, it's this pushing forward. You mentioned challenging at the beginning. The challenge is, yes, it is just something that we need to keep on doing. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes. And like Anne says, you stop feeling as though you can't in the end, because your confidence just increases. And yeah, that's how we will have amazingly successful lives. It might not be exactly what we set out to do at the beginning, but boy, we'll have some great successes and achievements and actually experiences along the way.
And Helen, can you share any tips or practical advice we can use to build mental fortitude in times of isolation? You mentioned that looking at the small things, looking to the future. What else can you do?
For me, very much it was about control. I know Anne touched on that as well, about controlling your mind. I felt as though, of course, my time was pretty much taken away by mission control. Mission control dictated exactly what I did nearly all of the day. And I ended up really wanting an element of that control. But actually, I recognized that there were small elements that I could control of my life. I could control what I wanted to eat, when I went to sleep. And I think it's when we're in this sort of this pandemic situation, we feel as though the pandemic has taken control, or the government, or whatever it is, somebody's telling us what we can and can't do now. And we don't like that. And it makes us quite anxious. So if we can take some sort of control over our lives and recognize actually that there's quite a bit of control we still do have, that not only decreases the anxiety, but allows us to move along and move forward in our lives in those ways that we can actually influence.
Okay,
there's lots of different things, I think, but yeah, control is one of them. And I think I'm trying to think what others I didn't mention about really sort of that the idea of being together, but certainly supporting each other, hugely important. And that idea of if you've got somebody that you're living with, yes, there is the downside that actually you might get on each other's nerves every now and again, because we can't actually get out that much. If you haven't got people to live with, well, you need that connection. But however many people we live with, it's certainly not as many as human beings need in our social circles. So keeping the connections going, and boy, aren't we lucky that we've got these kind of remote connections that we can use. They're not as good as real life. We will get real life back. And yes, looking forward to that time, not necessarily in a time frame, because things change. So the astronauts will not always, they won't always sort of think in 5 weeks' time I'm going home, but they will think towards the time at which they'll be able to hug their families and friends again.
A valuable lesson actually in this current time. And let me ask you another question that has come through. And this is an interesting one, because many people experience failure in their lives. Was there a certain failure in your life that taught you a powerful lesson that you can share with us?
I've had lots of failures. I think failures, I even quite like the word, because I think we're sometimes too afraid to own things. One of the biggest that I had was after the expedition with Caroline Pomm and myself, I wanted to be the first woman to go solo to the North Pole. And I set off full of hope and fear. And after 21 days on the ice, with encounters with 5 polar bears, I received the phone call to say that the Russians were taking all the permits away from every expedition that year, not just mine, but every expedition. So they actually sent out a military helicopter and picked us all off the ice. There was no amount of positive thinking was going to make me get back on the ice or get me to the pole. It didn't, it was done. And so I sat first on the aircraft, and I was really sad and devastated that my dream had come to an end. And again, the only thing I could change is how I thought about it. And I felt really different about it. And I thought about, it was in 2005, all the people with the Asian tsunamis who'd lost their lives, and eventually I turned it around in my head and thought, how dare you be devastated? Actually, you've had the most amazing adventure on the ice. You've had encounter with polar bears, and there's been no problem. And you're nobody from nowhere. And I say that in the best heart, because I think everybody's somebody, but not in the polar world. And so I came out of that thinking, wow, I had a great time, but I don't want to do records anymore. I think they're amazing. Olympians are amazing, don't get me wrong. But for me, it's not enough. And I used it as all that learning to then, that's why I got involved in science and doing a different type. So if you will, that failure, I learned from it, and it sent me down a different path, and a path that I love more and better. And so, yeah, I think failure, we have to embrace it, learn from it, and then go on and still do something different, and don't let it stop us or bring us down. It's the journey. It is.
Yeah, fantastic tips. So, Helen, let me go back to you, because we've got so many questions that have come through. And I just want to ask you, what are you most passionate about right now? And what are you looking forward to in the future? You talk about this really important aspect in our lives, which is so crucial right now when so many of us are constrained. What are you looking forward to in the future?
I am passionate about us taking part much more in a sort of a social democracy. And I think part of us as being a bit more social animals like this is this basic understanding of everybody to have some science. I'm not saying that we all understand everything about science, absolutely not, but nobody could. But the fact that we perhaps would have enough confidence, everybody would have enough confidence to ask questions of our leaders, which would then bring science more to the fore. Now we're seeing already in America how a change of how science is brought into government at a top level might actually affect the lives of individuals, how we can actually use that to improve the environment and the climate change that we've got going at the moment. So I'm looking forward to a time when I think more of us will be able to participate in these sort of public debates with a knowledge of science, so that we're doing the right thing, not just for any one particular part of one particular nation in the world, but so that we do collaborate with the rest of the world, and we do it for the benefit of everybody. And I think that will only that will really solve the things like big things like climate change, the possibility of an asteroid impact, and yet another pandemic that is bound to come at some point. So if we're ready for it, we'll be in a much better position than we are at the moment.
Focusing on science really does seem so crucial right now. Let me give the last word to Anne, because we are coming to the end of this session. And I do want to ask you about representation, because it really has been a crucial linchpin to the future of inclusion and diversity. Do you think we're seeing the shifts that are needed? Has there been real progress in your field?
No, no, I'd love to end by going, yes, it's been amazing. I think that women are now out in the polar world as they are in sports, but not enough. It is still a male-dominated area, and I think more women need to push and believe in themselves to understand that they can do that in the way that Helen also said, but also more men to lift them up. And sponsorship, we could go down that road, and that's everywhere. It's not as available for women's teams as it is for men's. It just is still an unequal world, and it's not that everybody wants it. We just haven't found the right formula to make it happen. And so that would be my hope for the future, that we stop trashing the world, we have more inclusion, we're kinder, all those things that everyone can help. And if little bit by little bit we all do our best, then we can have diversity, we can have inclusion. Because if I talk about women in the polar field, there are very few, if you will, different ethnicities. It is a very still white dominated area. So there's a lot more to be done everywhere. And we all need to try and do it to the best of our abilities.
So it's a real work in progress. Well, thank you so much to Helen and to Anne and to Eni earlier. She had to shoot off because she's very in demand at the moment. I really do appreciate your time today. It's been really fascinating. You've really given us some valuable insights to share and to celebrate International Women's Day. It is all we have time for, but rest assured, Speakers Corner team will have the highlights reel of today's event for you to rewatch at your convenience. Now, if you would like any information about myself or any of the speakers this afternoon, please do contact one of the Speakers Corner team. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.